Hello, I'm Gary Alfonso and you're watching Business Q&A. We're talking to a company called Jachris, which is an integrated fluid transfer, fluid power and fire suppression services provider to heavy-duty industrials and mining companies across Africa. And to discuss the company's 50-year or almost 50-year journey, I'm now joined by CEO Warwick Bouwer. Warwick, thanks very much for joining us. A company with a 50-year history and with a very unique niche in the South African and African market. Tell us about it.
Well, thanks for having me, Gary. So the business was established back in 1976 out of a small shop in Brakpan on the East Rand by my grandfather, my father and my uncle, with a view to really just servicing the mines and smelters in the area with hoses and fittings. Fast forward through some steady growth through the 80s. My uncle sold out of the business in 88. My grandfather passed away in 89. And my father kind of took charge of the business throughout the 90s. I joined in 2003 after a short stint in banking in Europe. And in 2005, we bought my grandmother out, and that really led to the first sort of step change in the business and to some significant growth, where we were really free to grow the business as we saw fit. That took us to our first private equity transaction in 2010, where, truth be told, our backs were somewhat against the wall. We had really grown ourselves into a difficult spot. We used that opportunity to not only steady the ship, but to take our business into Africa, and we invested heavily into Africa. And if we thought the times prior to that private equity deal were difficult, they got even worse. That African journey in the early stages was really, really difficult, and took a lot of effort not only to thrive but to survive. But eventually we did steady that ship. The business model we had dreamt up started making sense, and that led to our second private equity transaction in 2019, which really allowed us to strengthen the balance sheet, to take us not only through COVID but also to really double down and take advantage of that commodity boom that followed.
What led to this significant step change in the company?
So I think we could probably look at a couple of things. I think both private equity transactions certainly helped. I think support from our bankers at a time when we needed it certainly helped. But probably the key or integral difference was we really shifted the business model. So the traditional business I entered back in 2003, we were a traditional product sales business. We hunted product sales like everyone else, and effectively became order takers, right? The business model we shifted to was we combined that product business with a vendor-managed inventory model and then a services model. So that gave us a lot more power over that sales channel, and really put us in the position that we are in today.
And your decision to shift into Africa, many companies trying that, but you have a real presence now.
Yeah, so I think in the early days, we were probably well, firstly, I think we didn't have a viable BEE strategy, and I think that was something that was very clear to us. We couldn't grow heavily into the mining space in South Africa in that 2010 space without a viable BEE strategy, and I think we weren't prepared to do it half-heartedly. We wanted to do it the right way. So while we tried to figure that out, we thought we'd pursue our business model in Africa, and truth be told, we were chasing the US dollar and euro revenue for South Africans, where our currency is so volatile and so difficult to build a global business.
Now, in terms of your key markets or entries into Africa, what are some of the victories but perhaps also challenges in the 10 countries in which you play in Africa?
So I think the challenges are usually around timing, right? So whatever you think about Africa, if you think it'll take X, it's usually 2 or 3 times that. And I think what that then does is place immense pressure on your cash flow, and that's precisely what happened to us. So if you think it'll take 3 months and it ends up taking 9, you effectively need 3 times the cash. So those were our primary challenges, and I think what makes it even more difficult or exacerbates that problem is your bankers generally aren't willing to support your African business, which I think is quite perplexing when you look at how difficult trading conditions are in South Africa at the moment. And for us, certainly the easier part of the business is in Africa, but bankers only look at your South African balance sheet and your South African business, and are only willing to lend you money based on that. So at the time when your business is growing in Africa and the cash flow cycles are so slow, your bankers end up closing the taps, and it just becomes more and more difficult. As you grow, you effectively grow yourself into a cash trap. which is what's happened to us on occasion. Fortunately, we've managed to weather that. I think on that same cash flow challenge, what's happened to us a couple of times in various jurisdictions is a lot of African countries, for whatever reason, run into liquidity challenges or crises. And what happens then, and you end up getting your own money trapped in that particular country, and you can't feed it back to your mothership where you actually have to pay the suppliers who feed your business. So that's proven really challenging. If I sort of look at the victories, I think one of the small ones would be getting support from our private equity partners and our bankers when we needed it from time to time. I think secondly, when we shifted our focus from being a product business to being a service business on site, we really saw it as a must-win battle. We almost approached it with razor-sharp focus, and we built a kind of an IP base that we could really roll out across the continent, and I think that stood us in good stead, so that we could really reproduce a really solid service offering to every one of our customers throughout Africa. We then combined that with some pretty clever technology where we were able to not only carry out the service we committed to our customers, but actually prove that what we were doing was the right thing by way of hard data. And that really, I think, took us to where we are now. And then I think the key was we were the first service provider in our space to realize that we needed to combine various services together. So we call it the integrated approach. In a mature market like South Africa, you'd have several service providers providing various services to a particular mine. What we did is we combined several services into one service offering, that way leveraging the extreme cost base of doing business in Africa and allowing us to be competitive to the client whilst still being profitable.
Just very quickly, and you've survived difficult times, several changes, recently COVID. What's next for the company?
So I think we're going to probably look at our third round of private equity early next year. Off the back of that, we'd like to continue our organic growth by acquiring more sites in Africa, but at the same time I think we want to make a few acquisitions to companies who fit our sort of space and our profile, and then we'd look to move that product down the sales channel we've created.
We're going to have to leave it there, but fantastic South African story. Warwick Bouwer, the CEO of Jachris, thanks very much for joining us on the program.
Thanks, Gary.
Well, that's it for now, and stay tuned for more programming on Business Day TV.